Hidden among the canyons of Jordan's desert lies one of the most magnificent cities ever built. Petra, a metropolis the size of Manhattan, carved not from bricks and mortar, but directly from the face of living rock. Its temple-like facades soar over 100 feet tall. Its streets once bustled with 30,000 people, sitting in one of the driest places on Earth, where there is, as one archaeologist puts it, not even drinking water. So, how did they do it? For over 1,000 years, Petra's locations stayed hidden, protected by fortress-like cliffs and the Bedouin tribes who fiercely guarded its secret. Then, in 1812, a Swiss adventurer disguised as an Arab pilgrim risked his life to find the legendary city. Johann Ludwig Burckhardt squeezed through the Siku, a dramatic slot canyon nearly a mile long, its walls rising almost 600 feet on either side, and emerged to find something that stopped him cold. A towering facade carved into the sheer cliff face, majestic columns rising from the canyon floor, ornate statues of mythological figures, an urn perched impossibly high on the roof. He had found the Treasury, the Al-Khazneh, the most iconic structure in the ancient world and one of the most breathtaking sights a human being can stumble upon. But the Treasury wasn't a treasury at all. Despite what Indiana Jones suggested when Harrison Ford and Sean Connery walked through its doorway searching for the Holy Grail, it held no gold, no divine artifacts. The urn at the top is solid rock, the so-called square scaffolding marks on its face, most likely footholds carved by treasure hunters over the centuries, firing bullets at the urn hoping to crack it open and spill its riches. The bullet holes are still there. The only real treasure was the sculpture itself, 80 feet wide, 127 feet tall, twice the height of Mount Rushmore, carved from a single living cliff. And the treasury was just the beginning. As Burckhardt moved deeper into the canyon, the scale of what he'd found became overwhelming. Hundreds of magnificently carved facades lined the walls, many rivaling the grandeur of Egypt, Greece, and Rome. A 6,000-seat theatre cut directly from the sandstone, a colonnaded main street flanked by enormous temple-like structures, monuments climbing even higher into the surrounding mountains. This wasn't a ruin. It was an entire civilization, frozen in stone. The people who built it were called the Nabataeans. In the 4th century BCE, Greek sources described them as nomadic tent dwellers, roaming the desert with their herds. Just 3 centuries later, they were one of the wealthiest kingdoms on Earth. The Roman writer Pliny called them the richest race in the world. What changed? 2 words: frankincense and myrrh. These weren't just exotic gifts brought by the 3 kings to the baby Jesus, though that's how most people know them. They were the essential luxury commodities of the ancient world. Aromatic resins made from tree sap in the southern Arabian Peninsula, burned obsessively in religious ceremonies across Egypt, Greece, and Rome. The demand was insatiable, but the supply was locked behind hundreds of miles of lethal desert, and to cross that desert, you needed someone who knew it intimately. The Nabataeans did. After centuries of nomadic life, they had memorized every hidden water source, every navigable route, every place where survival was possible and where it wasn't. They became the indispensable guides and gatekeepers of the incense road, the trade artery that pulsed from Saudi Arabia to the port of Gaza, the gateway to the entire Mediterranean world. Along the route, they built fortified outposts, charged tolls, processed raw frankincense into perfume bottles for export, and loaded their goods onto camels and donkeys. The wealth accumulated rapidly. Petra sat at the center of it all, and the Nabataeans poured their fortune into making it magnificent. That city, though, raises 2 profound questions. Building a metropolis in the middle of the desert requires 2 things above almost everything else: the ability to shape stone on a monumental scale, and the ability to conjure water from a landscape that has almost none. The Nabataeans mastered both, and their solutions, when scientists finally began to unravel them, turned out to be stunning. A geoscientist has spent over 3 decades trying to understand the stone carving question. Petra is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, so experimentation there is impossible. Instead, he travels to Southern California, where sandstone cliffs along the coast are chemically identical to Petra's, and recruits 2 master stonemasons to attempt something that hasn't been done in 2,000 years. Carving a complete Nabataean tomb facade from scratch, using only the tools and methods available to ancient craftsmen. The tools themselves turn out to be essentially unchanged from antiquity. By matching modern chisel marks against originals still visible in Petra's stone, he confirms that the pointed chisel, the flat chisel, and the claw chisel, iron instruments that predate Christ, leave the same marks today that they left 2 millennia ago. The technology never needed to change because the stone never changed. But the method of carving is the real revelation. A half-finished structure in Petra, aptly called the unfinished tomb, gives the crucial clue. The top portion is beautifully complete, though the bottom hasn't been touched, still raw natural sandstone. The implication is unmistakable. The Nabataeans carved from the top down. Without large quantities of wood for scaffolding, a genuinely scarce resource in this desert, they climbed to the top of the cliff face, cut a narrow ledge into the rock, drilled pins into the stone just below it, and laid a handful of planks across those pins to create a minimal working platform. The carvers stood on this tiny ledge and worked downward. As the carving descended, it consumed the pinholes, erasing all evidence of the platform as it went. By the time they reached the bottom, no trace of the technique remained. That's why no one had figured it out. The method was self-concealing by design. Then something unexpected happened during the California experiment. As they carved, the volume of rubble they produced was enormous, far more than anyone anticipated. That rubble accumulated at the base of the cliff and formed a natural ramp. They could simply walk up the rubble ramp and reach the lower sections of the carving on foot. The debris became the infrastructure. It's a construction approach unlike anything documented in any other ancient culture at this scale. The water challenge is no less remarkable. Beneath the great temple in Petra's city center, ground-penetrating radar, used like an X-ray for the Earth, reveals a hidden network of channels running under the courtyard, a buried plumbing system extending in multiple directions beneath the city. The question is where all that water came from in one of the driest environments on the planet. 5 miles away, high in the mountains, sits Ain Musa, the Spring of Moses, legendarily the place where Moses struck the rock and water flowed. Getting that water to Petra required a pipeline of tens of thousands of ceramic segments, each roughly a foot long, every joint a potential failure point under pressure. Hydro Engineers tests the physics in a laboratory tank. Their discovery reframes how we understand ancient engineering. A steep pipe slope of 6 degrees causes turbulence, fills the pipe completely with water, and builds pressure that would blow apart ceramic joints. But reduce the slope by just 2 degrees to 4 degrees, and everything changes. The water flows fast and smooth. The pipe never fills completely. An air gap above the surface keeps the pressure low, and the joints stay sealed. It is precisely the right solution. And when the actual slope of the carved channel still visible in Petra's Sick is measured, it is 4 degrees. The Nabataeans independently derived hydraulic principles that Western science wouldn't formally codify for another 2,000 years. The full scope of their water engineering staggers the imagination. 8 freshwater springs, 36 dams, over 100 cisterns and reservoirs, and 125 miles of pipeline, all integrated into a single master network, conceived and built within roughly 100 years, around the time of Jesus. It delivered approximately 8 liters of water per person per day to 30,000 people, more than enough to survive. But the Nabataeans didn't just survive, they made a spectacle of it. What archaeologists excavated next to the Great Temple turned out to be not the marketplace early explorers had assumed, but a massive ornamental pool complex, 140 by 80 feet, nearly the size of an Olympic swimming pool, with an island pavilion at its center and a lush irrigated garden on the terrace below. Fountains lined the colonnaded streets. Canals ran through the city center. Water, the most precious resource conceivable in a desert, was being lavished purely for beauty and power. The comparison to Las Vegas is entirely apt. Petra was sending a message to every merchant and trader who stumbled out of the parched wilderness after days on camelback. Here is wealth, here is civilization, here is a place that has conquered nature itself. And then, over centuries, it faded. The earthquake of 363 CE brought columns down across the city, but the decline had started earlier. The great pool was already being used as a trash dump by the 2nd century. The dam network, weakened by successive earthquakes, eventually failed, and flash floods tore through the city center, ripping cobblestones from the main street. The very force the Nabataeans had so brilliantly mastered turned on them at last. Ironically, the water that made Petra possible may have delivered its end. Petra means rock in Greek. The Nabataeans were born in this valley of stone, lived in it, traded across the known world from it, and when they died, were sealed inside it. Their architecture was a synthesis of every civilization their trade routes touched. Assyrian crow steps, Egyptian cornices, Greco-Roman columns, Indian elephant capitals, fused into something entirely their own. Their engineering was centuries ahead of anything the West would formally recognize, and their reverence for the sandstone itself, leaving the capitals in beautifully simple abstract form, finishing surfaces by rubbing them with the same stone carved away, spoke to a relationship with their material that went beyond craft into something closer to devotion. The legends Burckhardt chased into the desert turned out to be true. The lost city of stone was real, and it was greater than anyone had imagined.